There we go. If you, Regina or David, do you have any seedlings that you'd like to show or get in the meantime while we're waiting for other people to, let's see if I can pull this down. I think I'm not tall enough to make those lights, dim the lights. But if you have any seedlings that you'd like to share with us online, so we can check up your seedlings, that's what this is about. We have something prepared. Thank you, Dave. It's very bright. It's gonna become dark soon anyway. We planted some last week, Regina says, but they are only barely coming up. That's okay. What's the weather like right now and you planted them last week. That's great. That's to be expected. What did you plant? And are they indoors? And I see Kristen McKinney's joining us too. Hello, Kristen. And I was just telling David and Regina who are with us, if anybody would like to share bring their seedlings up to show, that's the first part. And I'm gonna share my screen, I guess. So as people come in, seedling checkup. Present. You can take this time to go grab them if you need to, if you want to share them or not, and we'll just go through what we have prepared. How about you, David? Were you able to start some seeds from last week, or were you, this is another David who's here, were you able to watch the replay of last week's seed starting? And if not, that's perfectly fine. We'll pick up from wherever you are. Let us know where you're growing from, David, because I know Regina's in Colorado and Kristen's in DC. It's nice to know where you are planting. Gives us a little context. Okay. How do I go to the next slide? There. So this is recorded. So for those of you who are new to us, I'm Nikki, and Dave is muted because otherwise
And I'm David.
there'll be reverb. But he's like a seedling expert. And our kids led us to grow our own food because of their allergies. And we are currently here in Germany, enjoying beautiful weather. Today it rained actually, and since our daughter is here, and we've also gotten to see a few German gardens and setups and lots of farms in her area. We started growing our own food, and people started asking us how to do it. So we couldn't go to everybody's garden, and that's why we started growing online. Okay, and Regina says, I've taken them into the warmth outside, but mostly they have been inside. We have radishes, lettuce, peas, carrots. Okay, and it's been a week, so probably the radishes have popped up, the fastest. If they're not ready yet, of course, unless they have two true leaves to transplant. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. The last webinar we gave, we did not talk about the Kickstarter. We are currently providing an app on Kickstarter and Kickstarter is a way to crowdfund all to help us fund the creation of this app. Dave is making it, and we are at this level, 76% funded at this point. So we're going to make a final push to ask you if you are interested to fund Kickstarter or to increase your pledge. This is the link to go to bit.ly/sage-app. And thank you already, Regina and Kristen and David, I think, for your support, or thank you in advance. And for anybody else who is watching this, who has pledged on Kickstarter. Currently in Germany, this is the season. They have their favorite vegetable is Kartoffeln, potatoes, but their second favorite vegetable is asparagus. And this is asparagus season, and you can see there's only one left. And these are really fat and chubby, like they want them to grow to like really fat and chubby, and then they scrape them. And They like them in different colors, especially the whites are all gone. The whites are gone, the greens, and this is a purple one that they really value the purple one. And then along, as we've been putting out our trash and such, there's a whole bin dedicated in to compost. So that's really interesting to see. Like everything that's compostable is in one whole bin, and you can just throw it out. It's part of the service that the city has. This is a spread that a Czech family made for us, not in Czech, but in the border of Czech Republic and Germany. We went to Regensburg to see them, and they served us these homemade pies filled with cabbage and cheeses. And this is kohlrabi. So if you've ever had or grown kohlrabi, it's a snack that just kids have in their lunches just alongside apples. So it's just eaten that way. So I just thought that was really interesting. So today we will be talking about, well, if anybody does have their seedlings to check up, this is what this space was for, the initial part. If you wanted to show it, train, we'll take a look and see what happens. And then we'll talk about how to examine your seedlings for signs of good health and identify early symptoms of common issues. And also discussing like optimal growth conditions, exploring how to create the ideal environment for your seedlings, focusing on light, moisture, and temperature, and then discover methods to support their growth. I'm at Alberta, Canada. Welcome, David. And we are still getting snow. I'm growing microgreens in a jar and have a few spring onions growing in paper cups to transplant later. That's wonderful. That's amazing that you're growing amidst the snow, right? So excited to get on. And we'll talk about how to keep those onions warm, or onions for us. Like, I don't know what your experience has been, David, but I feel like I found a lot of gardeners who have grown onions, and they always say the first time we grow them, it become brown right away, and you're not sure why. And it happened to us too. So we'll talk about that in a bit. So here's the health assessment. You may find that David had to close his camera but you might want to pop over here, Dave, if you wanted to, so they can see your face. They're too leggy, huh? Yeah, you'll be talking about some of these slides. So you want to pop in over here so they can see you, and then you can talk into the mic. So you might find that who among you has had any of these problems or other problems that we did not put in there, or all of the problems. Type in the chat if you have it. So Kristen, now that too laggy, you've had that. This is like, at the end of this, Kristen, at the end of this year, you are going to be the seedling expert and giving this webinar to other people because of all the experiences you've had. So don't feel like, here's Dave. He's going to be trying to answer questions on the chat if anything comes up too. Too leggy or too short, too yellow or white, no germination, and what other things have you experienced? And if there's anything else than this, do pop it in the chat. Let me see that we didn't remember to discuss, but go ahead, Dave. You want to talk about leggy seedlings now?
Yeah, you can see here that this is just a photo of an example of leggy seedlings, so you get an idea when you're growing your seeds of whether or not your seedlings are leggy. So you can see here what's happening. There's not a lot of leaf development. It's mostly in the stem, and then the plant is desperately kind of like trying to reach over to where the light is. So what can happen there is that it gets to the point that the whole plant then starts lying on the soil, and the danger there is then that when you're watering, the stem might get infected or start to rot. So what we wanted, the way to really deal with that is to make sure that your tray is getting enough light. If you don't really have a grow light, or you're you're limited in terms of the indoor growth that you can do, you can try rotating the tray
by a sunny window.
By the sunniest window that you have. You want to make sure also that there's maybe not a draft that might be causing the legginess as well. So you want to make sure there's not a lot of air moving through there. You want some air, but you don't want too much air. And then another thing is quite often people will start their seedlings in these little peat trays that expand. They're like little
Peat
pellets
pots, yeah.
when you water them, and then they kind of sponge up. And or there's other similar things like that where there just isn't enough soil for the plant to really develop a root system. So make sure that your tray is about as deep as possible with soil, because that will kind of promote the plant to develop a root system and kind of anchor itself.
Yeah, and sometimes the tray doesn't have enough soil for a plant that's very intensive, demanding, like a heavy feeder plant, such as tomatoes, um, to establish its roots. So it becomes too leggy and flops over. In this case, the plant should either be transplanted outside or into a second tray or to a different tray. But I always think it's like holistic. Sometimes it's the light. The more often than not, the legginess is the light issue. If it's not the light and you have light and you still find leggy, spindly, not well developed, I want to say stem, the main trunk of your seedling is not nice and firm and fat and it's limp. I feel like that's also a soil issue. So we'll talk about soil in a little bit.
So this is just another example of legginess. There's actually two things going on. You can see that not everything germinated. So that's one problem. We'll talk a little, well, I'll talk about it now, I guess, is that a lack of germination is quite often because it wasn't evenly watered. So if the tray dries out too much, most seeds need quite a lot of water to kind of jumpstart them and start that process of germination. So if you're seeing like spotty germination like this, and you're pretty sure the seeds are not too old, then it's more than likely you're inconsistently watering them. And again, you can see these are nasturtium in the lower tray. They're kind of reaching over because they're not really getting enough light.
So we put them outside at this point. Yes, this is why microgreens sprouting in a jar works even without soil medium, is because the initial stage of the seed is just banking on all the water to burst that seed coat open. So the watering at the first day of starting your seeds is really important, like Dave said. Yeah, and if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat. Too yellow or white?
So this is, you can see this picture of I believe this is a melon or a cucumber on the right, and you can see that, so that even though the two leaves that are yellow there are not the true leaves, but at this stage of development, you should be seeing, like a healthy dark green for your plants. So if you're starting to see yellowing, then it can be a couple different things. So what you want to do is kind of first isolate what that thing might be. So more than likely, it's either anaerobic conditions in the soil. So maybe there's a bit too much water, and that's promoting the development of anaerobic bacteria, which are harming the plant. And also, if the plant's not getting enough oxygen to its roots, then it's going to feel like it's slowly
Suffocating.
Yeah, so that could be one issue. Another issue could be that it's getting too much light. So if you have a grow light and it's too close and it's getting hot, the conditions are like if you had a fluorescent grow light and it's getting too hot in the tray, then it can almost be like
Burning.
yeah,
burning it.
So what I suggest in those cases is it's not going to hurt the plant too much if you just take it out of that grow light for a couple days, just to see whether the color of the leaves improve.
Come back.
So that's one way to isolate that.
So sometimes Dave will take an entire tray and put it in the dark in a place that's not on the wherever our heat lamp, our grow lights are, just to see for a day. It's, if it comes back and perks up, then it's the light is the reason. Most of the time, this is a photosynthesis related problem. So anything to do with photosynthesis would be basically photosynthesis is happening if your leaves are turning green. If your plant, most plants will turn green, and that means they're photosynthesizing properly. They're getting the right amount of sunlight to turn to energy and keep on growing. So if there's overwatering or underwatering or a mineral deficiency that in the soil that prevents the photosynthesis from happening, that's what you'll get, yellow leaves. And that's why yellow leaves is a little tricky, because it's not just one thing. It could be all those three at the same time, or it could be only one of those 3 or 5 things that I've mentioned.
So this is another thing that can happen when you're starting seedlings, is that they're not growing fast enough, and you're wondering, you see that they've all germinated, but they're all small, and you're just like, why is this taking so long? So this is not the worst problem, as long as you're getting good root development. Then even if the leaves, and usually this is another not enough sun issue, but if you can't really change that, it's not that bad to have a slower developing seedlings. But what you want to do is just kind of keep things in a holding pattern until the weather improves. So you just keep doing your regular activity, and with the watering every other day and keeping an eye on them. And then gradually, even if they're a bit small when you put them outside, as long as they have a good root development, then they'll bounce back very quickly. So another thing you can do is just kind of mix a little bit extra in the soil to compensate for the lack of sun, the lack of light on those plants.
So adding a little bit of extra dusting of compost. So you're looking at a microwave composting here. You take these same techniques actually and do a bigger version of them when you are outside. But in the smaller case, we're just dusting things. If we see it's a bit too, if we think, well, see, the dusting of compost here is one thing. Dusting of an amendments such as azomite or rock dust are helpful in case the soil that you started out with didn't have
Enough
enough
like enough
minerals
minerals and
to support the growth of
yeah.
the
So
yeah.
early on, you have two different types of phases for plants.
Oh,
So,
sorry, do you want to go through we'll talk about, is that which phase?
I was just talking about the vegetative phase,
Oh, okay,
the
go,
mineral.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so we've mentioned this a little bit in the previous presentation that we did on starting seeds, is that early on, there's some of these trace elements are needed for your plant does need carbon, and it does need nitrogen just to get things going. So if you're gonna apply that oomph, and you want to put those kind of things in the soil, the early on is when the plant kind of needs that, and then later on there might be some missing. Like if your plants are growing well, but then they seem kind of limp and they're flopping over, then it's more likely one of these trace elements like iron that's missing in the soil.
So you're saying the macro elements first for the vegetative part, and then the
Yeah.
micro elements later. Another thing is, if you're growing on, sometimes seedlings are started on what's called soil-less medium. So it's like a soil substrate, but it's not a living soil with microorganisms that actually digest these nutrients that we're talking about for the plant to eat it all up. So if you are growing on coconut coir, peat, that's a mixture of soil, that's a mixture of growing substrate that's predominantly not soil, then you can also get these problems. And that's when you have to, putting a compost introduces the life in the soil.
So I wanted to show here that in some cases, it's just the plant takes some time, and you kind of will have to use your intuition, but there's a point where you can do what's called a second transplant. So what you're doing is you're not moving it outside yet. It's still too small to move outside the plant. What you're doing is putting it into its own individual pot so it can have a little more tender loving care. This really works well with things like herbs or
Mhm.
things that take a little longer to grow. And then you let that seedling continue to develop. Initially, it'll have some transplant shock because you moved it into a different pot, but in the end, this works really well for making sure that that plant gets to a good size before you put it outside.
Yeah, I'd love to know, especially Kristen, like the transplanted peas, if they're doing better, or did they initially have shock and then they came back up, or
Um, so the peas really are doing okay. They're probably about this tall now. And
wow.
I put a trellis out, so, but they haven't reached the trellis yet, and they're going in different directions. So I'm trying to guide them, but they're not listening. The arugula was most shocked. That's what turned completely white.
Mhm.
And it is now doing really well. Everything's doing really well.
Wow. Sometimes it just takes a while for them to figure it out. In the end, they figure it
Exactly.
out.
Actually, in this past week, it's just like they went to this growth spurt. I woke up like 2 mornings ago and I'm like, oh my God, it looks like everything grew an inch and looks a little greener, a little healthier.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good to hear. And I do have a trick for when the peas grow a little bit taller. I have a video of this on YouTube where if you have the trellis and sometimes the trellis can be too big for the tendril of the pea. So that's where pea ropes or putting string in between the trellis for the pea to hang on to might help. But another thing is, if you think that it can grasp that thing, if only it were wound about it, if it could grasp that bit of a trellis that you have, you put the tendril of the pea on to that stick and count to 15 seconds and then let it go. Like keep it on there and count to 15 and then let go. And and part of it will kind of stick there. So that's just a
It's a
trick I
little
thought.
bit hard with peas as opposed to like climbing beans or melons because they're more of a passive climber. So, like Nikki mentioned, it takes a little bit of encouragement to get them to stay where you want to and start climbing up.
Yeah, so this is an anise hyssop herb, and certain herbs will take like a month before they actually get to to like this baby size, and then you transplant it out just to encourage it a little bit more, and of course, David, this might be good for your weather, your climate as well, because you've started some things, you can start them now, and you're not sure when it'll be safe for them to transplant. So just be ready with these little 4x4 pots for those things that you really want to grow, like tomatoes and summer stuff.
So here it's just another example, but I wanted to show that once you've transplanted out a lot of the things out of the 1020 tray, then you can get these
4x4
either I'd
insert.
say 3 to 4 inch maximum square pots, and then you can use the tray. It's like you're repurposing the 1020 tray. So you transplant all your things into these second pots, but then you put them back in the now empty. You'll have to remove the soil, but now empty 1020 tray, and then you can use that kind of for underwatering. So you're not
Yes.
you're using what's it
Bottom,
called,
bottom,
self-watering.
bottom watering.
Yeah, bottom
Yeah.
watering.
Yeah. Um, that's a good point. I'm going to talk about that too in a little bit. But here's another example of Dave showing off two basil plants. And which one do you think was grown with a sprinkling of mycorrhizal? fungi.
You already
I
gave
already
the
told you.
answer.
So, hello?
Well,
Which
how are they
one,
going to
Dave?
indicate? You have to
Okay, that's
say
right. The one on
the
the left or the
is
one on the right?
is A,
Is
and the
A, the
one
one
on
on
the
the,
right is B. So if you have a guess, put it in the chat.
or just tell us.
Yeah.
B. Oh, why do you think, Kristen? Oh, sorry. Why do you think it does?
So, okay, so that's obviously the wrong answer. I thought it looked kind of fuller. Like if you look at A, you see that there's that one really straight, longer stalk.
Yeah.
And although there's more leaves, I mean, it's bigger in general. But I thought B tended to look in proportion like more, just a little fuller, but it's smaller. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's just the angle that we took the photograph. So what it would be, I think, better if we actually also pulled
The
the
roots
the
next
plants so
time. We
you'd
gotta
see
do
the
that.
root development.
Yes.
But that's the where the mycorrhizal fungi can really help with certain plants, is that it has this symbiotic relationship with the roots, and it really gives it that a big mineral boost. So it's kind of working with the plant. The plant gives the mycorrhizal fungi sugars and starches, and the fungi gives the plant minerals. It kind of extends the root system of the plant because the plants initially it's the the area around the roots called the rhizosphere is very limited. So it's very hard for the plant to get nutrition early on. So what you'll see with we've tried this with a number of different species, with especially like basil and tomato, with things that once they start getting going, they really kind of take off and they can become leggy. Is that um, it could really boost. We've seen about a 30 to 40% growth improvement from applying the mycorrhizal fungi to those plants.
Yes.
So these are just some additional tips if you're interested in this. Uh, you can order the mycorrhizal powder. It's like a spawn um, from Amazon, or it'll come as a powder. And then what a lot of people do that's a mistake is they'll just put it all over the soil and water it, and then it won't have that relationship, establish that relationship as easily. What you can do is so there's two stages when you can apply the mycorrhizae for maximum efficiency. One is when you're doing the transplant outside. So you'll get the seedling that you're about to transplant, and then you can just dust the roots with the mycorrhizal. Um, you could,
Powder. Yeah.
yeah, you could even have like a small dish and dip the roots in the powder. Another one is you just roll the seeds in the powder before you put them in the seed hole.
Mhm.
And then I just wanted to mention, if you're growing brassicas, though, that's one of the few plant families that doesn't have a relationship with mycorrhizal, so you won't see any kind of
Effect, yeah, on brassicas. Um, if you have fungus gnats as one of the problems of your seedling trays, we have found this tip from Vivian in our membership, and these things are very cheap. They are like sticky tape, $5 for a pack of several, and basically you just put them in the side and they catch a lot of fungus gnats and really bring down their population.
I think this would work generally with all kinds of fly
Type
problems
app,
that you
yeah.
have. So quite often you're growing indoors and the things are doing well, and then suddenly you see populations of insects that only do well indoors. So you see fungus gnats and other possibilities, white flies. And then the third one, which is a little harder to deal with, is if you see
Aphids.
aphids. Yeah. So aphids they don't fly, so they won't be trapped by this. But for the white flies, and I believe, and the fungus gnats, uh, there's you'll find different recommendations of what you can do, like you can spray neem oil or
We've tried that
yeah, we've tried
too.
all of this. The problem is that they're very effective at
Pop,
spawning in the
spawning.
soil.
Yeah.
They're looking for the water in the soil, and then it's just hard to keep the population down. So this is very effective because what happens is they're adults, they're flying around, and they have to
Land
land
somewhere.
somewhere,
They
and they end
land.
up landing on this thing that's sticking out, and then
Yeah. So that's, and then what, okay, so you guys do a seedling checkup for us. What happened to this tray?
Well, it looks like there's a whole section that didn't germinate, or you forgot to
that,
plant the seeds.
Exactly. These were from seeds that we harvested ourselves,
but we didn't dry them
but
properly.
we didn't dry them properly. So these are all tomatoes, right?
No, that's
Peppers? They're all
peppers,
peppers.
yeah.
But these ones were like, oh, we're prize peppers and rare to find. And so we tried to preserve them, but they must have gotten moldy or something that we didn't do it right or didn't dry them out properly. So when we planted them, nothing came up.
I think this is also just a good example of the kind of germination that you can expect to get in a tray. Like the other sections, you can see there's almost 100% germination. So you should be getting at least 90% germination from all the other seeds that you've planted.
Yeah, and you can see in your seed packet, usually they will put how much germ 90%. That means they've tested the seeds and done like a sampling. And I actually have a little, I have talked about this in the past where I've done this myself from the seeds that we harvest. Like I'll test them for germination and I can find out, okay, more or less this batch of seeds germinates at 80% or 90%. So optimal growth. So watering, we want it damp but not soggy. And to promote, to keep it, to control the water, we can sometimes use mesh trays and use bottom watering like what Dave mentioned. And domes also, things that if your house is too dry and you find that you're always constantly watering or the soil that you used was too dry and you're constantly watering, sometimes the domes help with the germ. And if you're in a climate that's very cold, like in Canada, the domes help with the germination, kind of keeping things moister and warmer. You just have to open that dome a little bit now and then. I'll show you some pictures after this. Light, we want, so these are four things that every plant needs: water, light, warmth, and soil. So for light, we talked about grow lights, and the one that we use is Mars Hydro, really whatever works for you. But for us, like that's the best, cheapest, but
I think it's the
still
value.
good value for your buck.
Yeah, because it can be
Yeah.
very confusing when you put in when you're searching for grow
And
lights.
then we've bought the really, really cheap ones and they're broken now. So, but the Mars Hydro is like $70 and
So
there's
you're
a
looking
book.
for that range, like in the uh, 50 to $100 range for a grow light. It'll be good enough, and if it's from a reputable brand, that it should last years. And then it's giving enough light because the cheaper ones are just not going to output enough. Uh,
Different
yeah,
spectrums of the sun, like
and the
yeah.
ones that are higher end, and there's crazy ones.
Some of them really don't make sense.
I
Like,
think half of them are for people who are growing marijuana indoors, and then the other ones are for an entirely different kind of consumer. These are for people who want to grow their entire plant from seed to harvest in a
in a like
indoors in a grow
enclosed,
tent. Yeah,
okay.
and those things can run like hundreds of dollars to
Yeah.
thousands of dollars, and those are just overkill. What we're using our lights for is just to get the seedlings going. So we found that's like a good sweet spot.
Yes, so this is an example of a mesh tray that we use. This is from Bootstrap Farmer, and I like them because their stuff does not deteriorate as quickly as Greenhouse Megastore.
The only thing note that I want to add for bottom watering is you can get water roots instead of soil roots. So your plant will do really well, and then you're like, okay, now I'll transplant it outside, and then it just dies when you put it outside. So if you do a lot of bottom watering, you'll need a little bit of extra time when you do the transplanting to kind of harden off the plant so it gets used to soil again, because it kind of gets tuned into, okay, I'm extracting all the nutrients from the
I'm used to
water.
getting it from the water right away. It's easy to get. But yeah, so that, and then this is the dome that I mentioned also from, there's some like little, the air can come out from here, so you can open that. Usually we use them half. This one I was trying to speed up the growth of my microgreens by putting the dome on them. So as I mentioned in the previous webinar, soil, we usually think about in the chemical, that it needs to have a chemical component, a biological component, and the physical component. And this is a pyramid of plant health. When we are doing seedlings, we are in the first stage of its if it's getting to be the best that it can be. If what you call that when you've gotten to the top of this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self actualization of the plant. So the first layer is what we're looking at when we're doing seed starting, and you can get this from this link. You can get that infographic and a whole hour explanation of what each of those layers are. bit.ly/plant-pyramid-kemph. Just want to make sure I'm citing correctly the people who I'm taking this information from. So here in this layer, we do not we think, okay, we need at least these elements here: magnesium, iron, manganese, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So a few NP, because those are the main macronutrients that Dave was talking about in the vegetative state. And these are also all of the minerals needed for photosynthesis to occur. So in this one, he says phosphorus is not directly involved in photosynthesis, but it is needed for photosynthate metabolism with the increased sugar production. Down. So some of the sources of this, if you're like, okay, I'm in the middle of seedling growth, what can I do now? If I find that my seedling is not growing well and I suspect it's something in the soil. So these are the elements in a product called azomite, which is A to Z of minerals and trace elements. That's what azomite stands for. It's like a patented name. But this is basically, is azomite the same as rock dust, Steve?
Yeah, so rock, you can think of it like it's a subset of rock dust. Like it's marketed
Different.
rock dust. So
And where does rock dust come from?
so you pay a little more for the azomite, and it's still very cheap, but it's not cost effective if you were a farmer applying it on acres. Then you would just want to get the regular rock dust. But we tend to go with the azomite because at least there's an indication of where they're getting the rock dust from. Usually they get it from like volcanic soils that have been pulverized.
And these are the minerals that are in azomite: zinc, boron, copper, cobalt, iodine, manganese, molybdenum, nickel, arsenic, selenium, tin, vanadium, tungsten. So
the great thing about rock dust is that because it's so broad on a lot of these trace elements, it's just an easy way to not have to think about which element you're lacking in.
yeah,
Whereas with some of the other things, like you're applying kelp or
yeah.
compost or something, you might be getting a lot of one of the macro elements, but you're not going to get as broad of a spectrum of the different micro elements that you would get from rock dust.
So Regina, for Colorado, what I was told by one of the people, a soil expert who was helping me with my research, was azomite is like an easy one for you guys because of the soil perhaps lacking the minerals in where you are when it gets too dry and too dry. So maybe you want to try that too in your garden. So seedling support: when to transplant, thinning, hardening off. Good to know, thank you. When to transplant, thinning and hardening off. And Dave, you want to walk us through this? When are how do you know when it's ready to go?
So you can kind of see, I've got another example tray here in the photo. I would say that that third section, so that's
This here.
this looks like Swiss chard and
This is
some
Swiss
kind of
chard here.
brassica. So the brassica is probably pretty close to getting ready for you to transplant outside. So it's um, that first set of leaves that you see are not the true leaves. They're called cotyledons, and they're seed leaves. So what happens is there's a lot of nutrition packed into the seed. It's kind of like a packed lunch. So when the seed germinates, that plant gets a lot of its nutrition initially from the seed. That's why microgreens are really nutritious and for you. But at some point, that plant will transform those into seed leaves that it just uses to continue its photosynthesis and get a good jump start. When you start seeing the leaves that look like what the adult plant will look like, those are the what are called true leaves. And you want at least 2 or 3 sets of those. So you probably want like 4 or 5 true leaves before you want to transplant that outside. That can be kind of frustrating when you're
Yes.
like, oh, I have to be patient, and it looks like these things really want to go outside. But in general, the main thing there is getting that root development. So even if the leaves don't have the 4 or 5 true leaves, as long as you're getting good branching systems on your root, the roots of your seedlings, then you know that when you transplant it, it's going to be a little healthier.
And you may perhaps you've experienced this yourself where you didn't get to that to four leaves that are true leaves and you already transplanted it. Don't take it out, just you've already done it. So leave it there and let's see, how that root system develops when after you've transplanted it. We're just talking about like optimal
So
growth
one
here.
quick point is that in this tray, you might transplant all those brassicas out. You don't have to. You can see the Swiss chard are not quite ready yet. So they only have 1 set of leaves, and they're not really the true leaves yet. So you can transplant the brassicas out and just leave all the chard in the tray. You don't have to transplant everything in a tray out when you transplant.
And perhaps you don't even have room for all these brassicas in your garden. And if that's the case, you can pot them into other bigger pots and then give them or put them in other places in your garden where you have space. Yeah. So yes, then you'll have a blank here and you'll still have the seedling growing for
We
a
do
little
that.
bit, for a
We do
little
that a
bit.
lot. If you have a lot of those square pots I mentioned earlier, you can transplant all of your extras into those square pots, and then you have backups, and then B, you have nice gifts for other people.
Another thing is, if you do not want to use the plastic is not the only way to go. There is a company called Cow Pots, which we really like and we would like to use more of. And they now sell a 1020 tray. Cow Pots does. The only thing is, once you use the 1020 tray, you cannot reuse it again. And I think because once you use the four for the smaller square pots of theirs, it becomes part of the soil and the roots grow through those pots. So that becomes part of your soil. So if you want a tray that you can use over and over again, you can build one from wood, or you can also use the heavy duty ones from wood
And they
strand
also
farm.
the cow pots, you can get these smaller pots that are kind of like those 4-inch ones that I was talking about, the plastic. And if you do use those, the only thing
They dry out a little
they
more.
dry out a lot, so I
Yes.
really bottom water a
And
lot
so what we
for
do is we
those
use these plastic ones and then we put the cow pot square ones on top of these.
in
And
the
that in the
tray and
tray,
then
that way we're
bottom
not,
water it.
yeah, because we lose a lot of water. Um, yes. And so Dave, did you want to talk about this lettuce?
Yeah, so this is a case where um, you have a fine seed, so you're not really planting individual seeds, and you get great germination. Then you're like, okay, obviously there's too many plants in this tray. So what I wanted to just talk about is this, how you, another way of thinning them. You wouldn't generally thin in the seed tray, so you're not really, you don't want to pull out lettuce or something else that you're starting that's this densely germinated. Uh, the way I would recommend dealing with this is that you start transplanting some of these things outside. So one of the advantages of plants like this that start very densely populated is that they are pretty good at bouncing back from the transplanting process. So lettuce is a perfect example. Is that this may look like a lot of these things don't have great root development and they're going to suffer, but right here is probably 200 lettuce plants in a single tray. And
And Kristen has a question.
okay.
At this stage, would you be able to just use these as microgreens and just take scissors and cut them off and it's pretty much
Yeah, you could
the
use,
same as microgreens?
yeah, so the lettuce is not it's not a huge, like it's nutritional value is not as high as some of the other things that are used for microgreens, like kale. Like if you had a tray like kale like this, then that would, yeah, you could do microgreens as well. So you could harvest some of the things like that, but you can also do multiple waves of transplants. So you could take, like 20 of these things on one, 20 lettuce on one side and transplant them outside, and you'd still have a,
Can still eat the rest. And I have seen, where was it recently that we ate? Where they created a salad and it, you almost feel like there's so much these people must be so, it, such an abundant harvest of lettuce because they had different sizes, and then the baby lettuce. And where was it that we ate? Oh, the mosh here, right? No, where was it? I feel like I've eaten recently someplace where they use lettuce in the small baby lettuce form, and it was incorporated in a meal, and it's perfectly fine too. So Dave was just saying, like, nutrition wise, not as highly nutritious as a microgreen, but it's yummy. Yes. So any other questions?
or if you want to show your
Or
trays,
if you want to show your trays or anything.
or even if you have like general seed starting questions, like when should I start
Yeah.
my summer plants? Or,
Yes, Kristen.
So, you know that, so my seedlings are all the sort of, my transplants are all the spring, Swiss chard, arugula, spinach, peas, some kale, and carrots. But I just got my seeds in the mail from Baker's Heirloom Seed Catalog for tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers. So I'm going to be starting my tomato and cucumber and peppers in the basement under a grow light. The cucumbers, I understand you want to direct sow. Um, so do
Two.
tomatoes and
But
peppers kind
later.
of have their own? Hmm?
Oh, I said you could start the cucumbers in a seed tray too.
Oh,
Wanted to, yeah. And
okay.
sorry, your question for do tomatoes
So
and
my
peppers.
question about like planting tomatoes and peppers is that it gets a lot more complicated when we're getting into tomatoes as opposed to what my spring vegetables were, just basically different kinds of leaf lettuce. So could you talk a little bit about starting tomato and pepper seedlings?
yeah, so
What kind of soil and everything?
I'll start with tomatoes. So tomatoes, and most solanaceae, so that's also peppers and eggplants, they prefer uh, kind of slightly hotter soil temperatures. So if it's cold in the place where you're starting your seeds, then you definitely want the heating mat that raises the temperature about 10 degrees. under that just to get the germination process going. So with the tomatoes, you want the soil to be fairly rich in the, because it grows fast and it uses up quite a lot of nitrogen. So I would recommend using some kind of compost as opposed to, like a inert, something like a peat moss for tomatoes, because what'll happen is the seeds are quite small and then very quickly the plant will be looking for some nutrition from the soil. Um, with the tomato plants, what you want to put them in a second. You definitely want to try to transplant them to a second pot before you transplant them outside. There's no advantage to getting them out as quickly as possible. Um, you want to wait till they're about, I'd say, 6 inches tall before you transplant them into a second pot. One of the nice things about tomatoes is if your tomatoes get leggy, like all solanaceae, you'll see that their stems are quite hairy. And that's because if you bury the stem, it will start to root along the stem. So one of the things that you can do to get a better root system is you even with the second transplant, you're burying that tomato plant all the way up to the almost, you only want to leave a couple leaves above the surface of the soil so that you get a really good root system, because that's the most important thing you're looking for with tomatoes is having a good root development. There's a lot of other information about like tomato maintenance once you put them outside, about removing suckers and things like that and how you tie them up, but I think
We'll end there
yeah, so I'll move
for
to peppers
seedlings.
now. So
Yeah.
peppers, are you growing sweet peppers or hot peppers?
Sweet,
Sweet
she said.
peppers.
Sweet, yeah. So peppers are one of these things that require a little extra time. They're more of a subtropical plant. So unlike tomatoes where you can get a good harvest almost anywhere in the United States, with peppers you want to look at the variety of pepper, because certain peppers will only start to really produce a lot if you started them early, like February or January indoors. So what you're then looking for, if you're starting now and planting your seeds, you're looking for a fast growing pepper. So what you're looking for is either one that's been bred for the north, so that there's a variety. It looks like a regular bell pepper, but it's a short season bell pepper called King of the North. Or you can still get good success with pepper plants that produce small peppers. So
Like
those will,
shishito peppers.
yeah, so shishito is an example. There's one called Jimmy Nardello. There's another one called Melrose. These are all slightly small. So a regular full-size pepper plant will get almost as big as a tomato plant. It'll get 5 feet tall, and you'll get dozens of large peppers from that. But to grow that, you have to be starting that like January, February. So to get that kind of yield from, if you're starting later, then you have to grow these ones that are bred to be. There's quite a big difference, like a month's difference, in terms of how fast they'll start to produce peppers.
I noticed the shishito for us. We grew them in a pot, and they were very prolific, but towards the end of the season. Not It was
Yeah,
not because it was late, like that we started
I
them.
think they're looking for, so shishito
Super hot.
specifically, they're looking for that super hot temperature. Once they start growing, they're very fast, but you have to get them to germinate. So again, I recommend the heat mat and the kind of extra watering to. Once you get those things to germinate, then you're good. But you don't want to be waiting a month or so for those seeds to germinate.
Yeah, great
I don't know if
questions.
that helps.
I hope that helped. Anything else? Mm. Yes, Kristen.
I don't want to be, dominate, but if
Oh,
nobody
you're the
else,
only one asking questions.
Yeah.
That's good. At least there are questions.
if there aren't any other questions of anyone, then I'll just keep asking. I have two more questions.
Go
One
for it.
is, um, so when I start my tomato and pepper seedlings, I'm going to go with potting soil mixed with worm castings, mixed with mushrooms. Is that right? Or the mycorrhizal,
Right. Yeah, yes.
mycorrhizal, right? Does that seem a good to start with?
I think that sounds great.
Yeah, I think it's fine. That second part is going to be critical as well. Like whatever you transplant that tomato plant into after it's germinated, you want that to be a deeper pot, as deep as you can get it, just to promote that root
And by
development.
deep, do you mean like 3 inches deep or?
No, like at least
Oh,
five
5
inches
inches, the
deep.
bigger pots that you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
One
Not
of,
the four, not the square ones that we showed. Those are kind of short.
so with the cool season plants, you can get away with a small plot like that, but you can't get away with that with a tomato. You want a deeper pot. So you
Okay.
want the pot, the biggest pot that you can get for that second transplant.
Okay.
Um, because what you really want with a tomato is that root development. And then even if you have your tomato plant is just doing great, once it starts growing, you'll still have to do what's called side dressing. So that means that at a certain point, right before it's doing its flowering, you want to feed it again. So you're putting like extra compost and
Crushed
green,
eggshells or
yeah,
yeah.
on it because
In July. You worry about that in July.
yeah,
And we'll remind you.
because one of the things that can be frustrating is you get all this great green leaf development on your tomato, and then you don't get any tomatoes. So there's a few things to do that we'll cover that at that point. In our climate in Virginia, the main thing you have to worry about with tomatoes is fungal diseases. So there's things like septoria. What you'll see is your tomato plant looks great, and you might even see this in the second transplant. So you're keeping an eye on the lower leaves, and what you don't want to see is like little dots on the leaves, little brown dots, because it's always indicates some kind of fungal disease. There's different types of fungal diseases. The ones that are the worst in our climate are one called late blight. But you can the way that you do the transplant for the tomato can you can kind of minimize the amount of late blight that you get.
Okay, yeah. That's for the
I'm
transplanting.
going off topic.
Yeah. We're gonna do the transplanting workshop May 1st. So that'll be something else, and then we'll just walk you through the whole process of from seed to harvest. So,
You said you had a second
oh
question?
yeah, what was your
Sorry,
second question?
Yeah, I guess this is more of a personal check-in question, but Nikki, I don't know if you remember when you were here, but I had taken the seeds from the microgreens and as an experiment, I had put them in pots and then peas and radishes started to grow. So the peas I transplanted and the radishes I transplanted when you were here. It turns out I went today to look at the radishes and it looked like it was starting to go to seed. So I kind of dug up and pulled one up, no radishes. It is not a radish plant.
Oh,
I don't know what it is.
did it look like a brassica when it came up? Like it had those four clover kind of leaves, like the
Yeah,
rest of them? Yeah.
yeah,
So it must be if it does have seed, it's not, sometimes that happens. It often happens to kale when you sometimes when you grow and then you cover it under the hoops and you uncover it in the spring. As soon as you uncover it and the weather turns warmer, it bolts. And it's like I've been here, it thinks that it's been there for a long time now and it's starting to seed. And
They're kind of sensitive to heat.
yes,
So
it could be a kale, it could be a radish too, because yeah, if you think that was a radish seed, it could have been that too, but it just felt like, yeah, if you want to try not transplanting it, but starting it from a seed and seeing what that happens, you might want to do that. If it bolts again, then it it's a radish that likes the cool weather. And that means because then
so
there are other kinds of radishes too that'll produce a bulb even though it's not that cold anymore. You
there's yeah, there's certain things then I would suggest if it keeps on bolting, uh, uh, I would try planting it in the fall because
yes, it'll never get
then it
that
never
hot.
bolt. Yeah.
And you'll get more
Okay.
radishes and then you get them in the winter in like January time and you'll pull them up and then they'll be really sweet. So maybe it's too late for that kind of radish, that
It
particular
might
variety.
be. I'll send
Yeah.
you a picture of it so you can see. Maybe you can identify that it's not a radish. It's
And
something else.
it's kind of like a pod that's sharp at the end. Is it making that kind of seed or
Is it
not
a
yet?
yellow flower?
Is it a yellow flower?
It's green and it's, you know what? It reminds me actually of broccoli. Like the
Oh,
little the little green, like a block broccoli floret.
I wonder if it is a broccoli. I wonder if that's one of the
It
microgreens you got.
it could be, and I'm growing it in the wrong climate, maybe.
Or it's, yeah. In that case, I mean,
Just
if it does make the broccoli floret, those are yummy too.
Yeah, if I get that, I'd be perfectly happy. I tasted one of the leaves and it was like, oh my God, it knocked my socks off. It had so many layers of like really spicy flavor that I was like, I don't know. We'll see. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, if it's spicy, it might still be a radish. Who knows? Yeah. So just because I know how the radishes make their seeds is different from how you see kale or broccoli make their seeds. They're like really distinct, sharp, pointy. So if it does make the flower makes the seed later on, you can, or if you want to just eat the flower, that'll be enjoyable too. Well, I'm glad everything's coming up well in your garden. I can't wait to see it when we come back. And anyone
Thank
else,
you.
you're welcome. With questions, David and Regina, are you guys good? Were you able to, what was your main takeaway? And feel free to type it in the chat. What are you going to do this week that that'll help you get to that next level of gardening or Ooh, hello, Regina.
Um, I'm
Um,
still hoping to see more germination. I'm worried some were too old, so I'm
Worried
waiting
for
to see.
what?
Let me grab it real quick. Let me see.
Yeah. And David, did you have any takeaways from today's workshop? Yeah, I'm gonna stop here so we can see Regina's.
It's sort of hard to see. I'm like, I don't know how much we'll be able to see.
Oh, okay.
It's
And
pretty much looks like dirt. I mean, if I see a few little ones coming up, so I'm not really sure. We'll see
And
how
how
that
long
goes.
have you had the tray? What's in the tray?
1 week, she said,
1 week.
radish.
I did it the day after the seed starting. So
Okay, radish, lettuce, peas, carrots. Do you want, is that, could I take, sorry, just a little bit more of a peek at the soil? Is it like dried out or,
yeah, I've been
oh,
trying to keep it moist enough. It's hard to. I know my camera is really bad.
yeah, I understand. Yeah,
It's
just
hard.
keep watering it every other
Yeah,
day.
that's I'm like I make trying to make hope I don't because I've had problems with mold and
Oh,
other stuff. So I'm always
oh,
like I'm
mm,
afraid of overwatering, but it looks moist enough.
okay. And then if you want to put, sometimes some people put like saran wrap if you don't have a dome or anything to just
Mhm.
cover the top to keep
Yeah,
the light still going in, but if you wanted it a little bit more warm if it's cold there. Yeah, let's give it another week and see if
If
let's
it hasn't germinated another week, then might
yeah.
be the soil.
yeah. Thanks for
Yeah, I
sharing.
used to have like I did put some earthworm castings. That's the only like beneficial thing that's in there because it's just probably some dead dirt. But
Oh,
I'm hoping
yeah, but maybe that azomite also might help if you can find
yes,
that.
that's an
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And for those of you who are new to us, you can keep in touch on our website, permaculturegardens.org. And once again, someone the last workshop asked us, what were we asking a pledge for? It's for our Kickstarter, which ends in 2 days, bit.ly/sage.app.
So Sage is over the years, we've run a number of workshops and then figured out that there's quite a lot of things to keep track of when you're organizing your garden. So that we've taken those things and kind of try to develop a web application to help you organize your garden in a permaculture way.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I will say good night from here and good afternoon to you all. So we'll see you again next week
In America.
in America. Bye.
Bye.